I think is the phrase. Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today at First Tuesday Conservatives Countdown to the Election. I am Devin Foley, CEO of Charlemagne Institute, and we are partnering with Alpha News to host and publish the countdown to the November election. Today, I have Ed Morrissey with me. It's a real treat to be able to have him. Humorously, I learned he's a Californian and transported here to Minnesota as I was as well. And we both agreed that we live in Minnesota because of the weather. Absolutely. So, Ed, as you say, it's been a slow year for news. Tell
Yeah.
me, tell me what's top of the mind right now for you.
I understand that there's a new crop report on frozen concentrated orange juice that's coming out, and a couple of brothers are really interested in what the results of that are. So I'm on the edge of my seat. Other than that, I really can't think of anything
No,
that's
no,
happening,
I
except
love
for a global
secrets.
pandemic and
Yeah, got to know what my
election.
fruit's doing, you know?
Yeah.
So how about jumping in? Amy Coney Barrett. I think she said about 5 or 6 words at this point, whereas the senators are literally sucking the air out of the room. What do you see with this one? It seems a completely different hearing and confirmation hearing than what we saw with Kavanaugh, obviously. How's it all
Oh
played?
yeah.
What are you thinking? Quick and done, basically, by the tone of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Democrats are much smarter this time around. I think they got burned on the Kavanaugh hearings the last time, Devin, and I think what they've done, and this is actually pretty smart. I've described it the last couple of days as making lemonade out of the lemons. Is they're using this platform to basically make their electoral pitch. You know, the 2020 electoral pitch: healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. Um, they can't stop Amy Coney Barrett, so there's not much point in trying. Uh, they don't have any dirt on Amy Coney Barrett, and they realize, I think, belatedly after Kavanaugh, that trying to do a character assassination made them look really bad and probably hampered their gains in the midterm election last time out. And with this, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, her position, she being a woman, it
Yeah.
seems that, setting the dogs and the hounds of hell on her like they did with Kavanaugh would not go over nearly as, I mean, if it went over poorly for Kavanaugh, I can't even imagine for a woman. But do you think there's
Well,
some?
they tried. They tried 3 years ago, right? And her
Right.
at the Seventh Circuit, her nomination to the Seventh Circuit, they tried pulling out the weirdo religious freak card, and that really backfired on them. They're not going to pull that out 3 weeks before an election. I mean, they're just not, and they're not going to hammer too hard on Roe v. Wade because there's nobody left to convince on that.
Right.
And by hammering on Roe v. Wade, it's just going to remind their activists that they're impotent in this particular case, and all that's going to do is demotivate their activists. So what they're looking for is I mean, it's not that they're not going to talk about Roe. They did talk about Roe. Feinstein talked about Roe today, but they're not hammering on it the way that they're hammering on healthcare. And the reason why is because that's been a winning message. That was her winning message in the midterms 2 years ago. So it makes sense to do that. It's an opportunity for them to have a national platform. The problem is that they had I mean, I think they remember the Kavanaugh hearings being, prime time, right?
Right.
Everybody tuned in. These are boring
No,
because when
very
you get right down to it, when you're doing a confirmation hearing for a Supreme Court justice, it's usually pretty dull. It's
oh
dull
yeah.
stuff, you know.
Well, 30 minutes of senators sniping at each other over dark money and this and that, and having absolutely very little to do with the actual confirmation. I mean,
Yeah,
that tires people already in a very vitriolic political season that we're in.
I am curious as to why they chose 30 minutes too. I mean, it's almost designed to be dull.
Hmm.
Now, Republicans control the rules on the Senate Judiciary Committee, so it's apparently what Republicans wanted. I'm not sure why Democrats went along with that. If I had been Dianne Feinstein, I would have argued for 2 rounds of 15.
Okay.
So everybody would have gotten 2 shots. Actually, I think they're going to get 2 shots, but they would have gotten 3 shots if they'd done 15-minute rounds rather than 30-minute rounds. Because I think Sheldon Whitehouse was the guy who went on for 30 minutes about dark money, about the deep, dark secrets of the Federalist Society.
They're a terrifying bunch. I've known a few of them. They are lawyers, so
Well, they're lawyers,
yeah,
so
you
what are you
need to
going to
watch
do?
yourself
But
a little bit around them. But overall, I tell you, no, it's a funny thing, you always hear, and you've been in the trenches even longer than I have, but it's always that conservatives have big money behind them and this and that. The building we're in, I have to laugh. We are in the concourse level in the basement with no windows. We have windows to a tunnel that has sunlights on it. So indirectly, we see a little bit of light. On the fourth floor, though, there are multiple left-leaning shops set up, and that's the top floor of the building. And I think that says everything you need to know about who has money and who does not.
yeah,
So,
I was not really clear on the point of all the dark money stuff. And then Ted Cruz came in about 2.5 minutes, just blew the whole thing apart by
yep.
pointing out the dark money behind the Democrats and the effort to oppose Barrett. I've been in both, right? I was there for the Justice Sunday for Roberts, again for Alito. Those were almost back to back.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think that I was around for the Gorsuch one. I may have done something with Kavanaugh, but remotely.
Okay.
But, there's conservative organizations that do that type of stuff. I think, of course, Carrie Severino
Right.
at JCN is great at this stuff. And we talked to her quite a bit, and she's terrific. But yeah, the money that's arrayed against those things is actually pretty impressive, and that was true with Roberts. They weren't quite as active with Roberts as they were with Alito. Alito, they really went after tooth and nail,
Right.
and then of course Gorsuch because of the Merrick Garland thing, and Kavanaugh just because they could do it. There's a lot of money gets thrown into these things, and I think Republicans were in a position where they had to insist on a short time frame. But I think even if Ginsburg had retired or passed away in May, they would have insisted on a 3-week time frame period. End of story, full stop, because they weren't going to. It was 2 months with Kavanaugh,
Right.
or almost 3 months.
It was a bloodbath. It was terrible.
Yeah,
it was actually miserable watching that as an American. Highest court of the land, and
well, there was no trust either because Feinstein had that information from Christine Blasey Ford in July and never shared it with Chuck Grassley, who was the chair at the time, and never talked to the Republicans about it. And it leaked from someone in her office just as it leaked just as the first hearing, I think, was either starting or wrapping up. I forget exactly what the timing was, but that was 2 months in. And this time around, it was 2 months after they had the information anyway. And this time around, Republicans are just saying, we're not going to give you the opportunity to go digging around for character assassination material. They don't have the time, but I doubt very seriously that they would have given it at the time. So as a result, all this stuff stacking on top of each other, everybody knows how this is going to turn out. Amy Coney Barrett is going to get somewhere between 51 and 53 votes in about a week and a half. She'll get a 10-7 vote out of the Judiciary Committee because no Democrats are going to come along on it. And then she'll be confirmed to the Supreme Court on a party line vote. And Democrats know it. Republicans know it. The media knows it. Everybody knows it. There's no drama in this thing whatsoever. And so it's dull. It's boring.
Yeah,
it seems
Sheldon
White House.
Everybody's going through the motions, and
that's exactly what it is.
It makes a very good pivot as well to what's really on people's mind, the presidential race.
Right.
I was always told by politicals and the people who live and die for campaigns that hatred of a candidate isn't enough to win an election. You have to have positive energy behind the candidate to be able to win, and it seems that we have two very, very different campaigns. We have President Trump flying all over the country. Just recovered from COVID, and he's back on the campaign trail. Whereas, I'm seeing videos coming out from Vice President Biden and what he's doing, and is not turning out crowds and not flying around and doing a traditional ground pounding campaign. That said, I don't know, there are enough allegations of fraud and, cheating and things of this nature to make people worried. But, if I was just going with energy, it seems that President Trump's a done deal, but that's not always the way it is. What are your thoughts?
Well, actually, I actually think that that's a better way to look at this. And I'm not making any predictions because Donald Trump is a uniquely polarizing candidate. The people who love him, people who like him, love him. The people who don't like him hate him.
Right.
And we've never really had a candidate like that before. We had him 4 years ago, right? Donald Trump. And I'd almost argue that Hillary Clinton was not quite as much, but pretty close to the same type of polarizing candidate. Joe Biden isn't.
Right.
Joe Biden really isn't, right? I mean, Joe Biden, they should have nominated Joe Biden 4 years ago. It would have been better off. They would have won that election with Joe Biden. He was still a little bit more energetic and is still a little bit more with it 4 years ago.
Right.
But the problem with this year is you don't know who's going to turn out to vote. I mean, you see things that says enthusiasm's off the charts, but we're in the middle of a pandemic and people aren't going out. They're not going into crowded places. People say they're going to vote by mail. That's traditionally very, very difficult to get full commitment on. And traditionally, the way that you do get full commitment on that is you have a ground game where you've done the door knocking, you've done the personal contact, you have somebody local who knows the people in the area who can say, hey, have you gotten that thing turned in yet? Is there anything I can help you with, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the Biden campaign is not doing any of that.
Yeah, that's my understanding. They are just starting to roll people out as far as
way too late.
Pounding on the ground. Yeah, as far as doing
way too late.
All of that goes.
No, you got to start that. You've got to start that really years earlier. This is what the Republican Party has done, right? I mean, after 2012, and this is what I wrote my book on. And First Tuesday Conservatives has been very gracious about me talking about my book. So I'm going to make this really short because I've heard it before.
Talk about it from one frozen Californian to another. And it's a long winter. Go buy his book. Go buy Ed's book. All of the books.
Well, I only have the one, so it's pretty easy. Buy my book, and then you're done. And a lot of people at First Tuesdays have already done that, and I really do appreciate it. But just to the Republicans after 2012, they tried to run in 2012. Mitt Romney's campaign tried to run this data-heavy analytics campaign with national messaging, where they're running the same ads in Virginia as they are in New Jersey and New York, and
was that in response to President Obama's 2008 campaign? I remember.
Not really. Well, it was and it wasn't.
Okay.
It was in the sense that somebody in the Republican Party heard that Barack Obama did Facebook, so they got Facebook.
Right, right. I remember there was some, PDF floating around. It was Inside the Cave or something like that, and it came out after the election, and it was bragging about how the Obama campaign used digital media and dominated because of it. So
that wasn't the whole story, and they didn't understand that until well after the election. Reince Priebus is the guy who really did understand this. I talked to him a few times for the book. And after this, I mean, I can tell you this, going into election night in 2012, the Romney campaign was convinced that they were winning based on their data analytics. They were showing us the data. They were showing us what they had. In North Carolina, in Virginia, they just were sure of it based on their analytics. And Ohio. So I'm sitting in Hugh Hewitt's radio station or, radio studio.
Yep.
We start finding out that North Carolina's gone, Ohio's gone, we lost Florida, and it became very clear that these guys really didn't have any idea what was happening on the ground at all. So Reince Priebus decides, to go to the Republican Party's institutional donors and say, I need high eight figures to build an organization like Barack Obama did. Not just be on Facebook, not just target Facebook ads at people, because that's what the Romney campaign and the RNC thought that Obama was doing. Obama wasn't doing that. I mean, he's doing that too. But what Obama was doing was he was going through Facebook data and finding people in specific precincts, neighborhoods, that were friendly or open to his message, they'd contact those people, convert them, and then they'd start sending them $50 or so to start having pizza parties in that neighborhood. And then they would say, well, what?
They would send them money to have pizza parties? I
Oh,
didn't
sure. Yeah. I
hear
mean,
about this.
yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, it's not illegal. It's perfectly legal to do this. Yeah.
No, it's yeah.
And they'd say, get your neighbors together. We'll spring for the pizzas. Tell them a little bit about us and tell us what they're telling you. What are their issues? What's going on in your neighborhood and stuff like that. And so they built this network basically of ambassadors to all these important precincts and all these important counties and all these important states. And they were getting all the feedback about, well, this is what's important in this neighborhood. This is what's important in that neighborhood. And that. So when the campaign would be in those areas, they would contextualize the agenda specifically to that neighborhood in West Tampa, which is it's a sort of a swing precinct, a swing area in Hillsborough County, Florida, which is part of the I-4 corridor. Part of the Obama platform, and you got to remember this is in the context of the financial crisis, and was that they were going to have a stimulus plan that was going to go to the local governments, cities, counties, and states to a certain level. So that was part of what their stimulus plan was going to be. So rather than just saying, well, we're going to send money to the states because we think that's great, they would say, look, we understand that you're having problems with the street lights here on whatever it was, Johnson Avenue, whatever you want to call it. When we give the money to West Tampa, we can earmark that money to fix those street lights and fill those potholes so that you guys have a safe road that you can drive on. Well, that touched their lives.
Yeah.
It's so people made these incredibly personal connections. And one of the people in West Tampa that I talked to was it's sort of a gentrifying neighborhood, slightly different neighborhood. Said he was in one of his neighbor's houses one time, and he saw that they had an Obama bumper sticker on their refrigerator. And you put a bumper sticker on your car so you can tell everybody else that you're voting for this guy, right? You put it on your refrigerator to remind yourself you're part of that person's life. You're part of that person's community, and that person's part of your life, because you're the only person that's going to look at that refrigerator most of the time.
Right.
And so it was this really personal connection that was based on this bilateral communication, based on contextualizing an agenda to the neighborhoods in which these races are won or lost. So I don't think the Republicans and the Trump campaign have really actually still gotten to that level, but they're doing the door knocking, they're doing the contacting, they're doing the, finding people in the precincts and stuff like that. I don't know that they're contextualizing their campaigns well enough. And that's true up and down the ticket. I would say that's true of the Senate races, it's probably true of the House races as well. But they at least have that structure in place. So this last 30 days, they can be going out to all of these people and saying, tell me what you're hearing. Tell me what you need us to say so that we can get your people out and get them in the voting booth or get them to mail in that absentee ballot. And you can't just start that on October 1st because you have to have all that stuff in place.
It would take months just to recruit sufficient numbers of people to be able to go through and,
you have to find the people first. It's insane to think that you can start doing this on October 1st. So all they're doing right now is just brute force door knocking. And even then, probably on a very minimal level, just, data gathering and saying, vote for Joe. They don't have a message other than what the national messaging is. They don't have any contextualization because they haven't talked to these people to find out what their issues are. All of that said, this is the reason why I think that you have to take the polls with a grain of salt. I am not a poll denier. I am not a poll naysayer. I think polls are interesting.
Is poll denier something that we have to be worried about now?
Oh God, yeah.
Am I a poll hater? I don't know.
I can't tell you how many people who, when I analyze a poll or I comment on a poll, they say, why are you still paying attention to the polls? Well, because it's data. I mean, it may not be great data, but
there's something there.
There's no other way to measure this stuff, and it's imperfect. And you just have to understand how, what it says, what it doesn't say, and and how reliable that is. And this is my thing with the polls, is I don't think that the polls are measuring the effect of that ground game, because I don't think pollsters really have a good grip on their likely voter models. Maybe less so in this cycle than any cycle I've ever seen. Now, it's possible that they're right.
Yeah.
It's possible that they've got it figured out and that it'll unfold exactly the way it is.
So
But I don't.
why is that? Is it because of people changing over to cell phones, technology, how they get their information, or is it simply that they're seeing the world, America, differently than what it really is on the ground?
No, I mean, I think it's a data collection issue in large part. And I think that there are just a certain number of people who simply won't answer the phone anymore unless they know the phone number. I mean, I'm getting to that point too. I get so many.
Yeah.
I pick up the phone and say, "This is an important message about your vehicle." Click.
Click. Exactly. And now, now they're pounding you with texts. I get texts all the time. You're late. The FEC report was yesterday. Now, match for an 8X gift. It's like, my goodness.
I don't think I've texted stop more in my entire life than I have over the last 4 weeks.
I didn't realize you could do that. I've just sit there reading them. Now I've got to start. Everybody,
you text stop back and it will unsubscribe you from that chain. I mean, I found that out. Unfortunately, people keep adding me in on other ones. It's terrible. But I mean, people just don't respond to that anymore. I think in years gone by, people were flattered when pollsters called them up and asked them for their opinion. But you've got so much telemarketing going on, and so much of it is garbage.
Right.
That people are just sick to death of it. So I think I think it's tough to figure out who's going to give you that information, who's not. I also think it's tough to figure out, especially under pandemic conditions, who's going to turn out and who's not. And under those conditions, you'd have to give the edge to the campaign that's got more enthusiasm behind it and more organization behind it. And in both cases, that campaign is the Trump campaign.
Right.
And so I'd say you're seeing polls come out. I think Minnesota, Biden +6, Michigan, Biden +6. I'd be less interested in those polls than in polls like Gallup's poll, which is national, which is another issue. But Gallup had a poll a few days ago with the classic reelect question, right? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Right.
Did you see this?
Yep. 56% says they're better.
It's a record.
Trump. Yeah.
It's a record by 11 points. And this is in the middle of a pandemic, mind you, and an economic meltdown because of the shutdowns, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's still 11 points higher than Barack Obama got in 2012. And he went on to win that election. And not easily, but certainly, firmly won that election. You take a look at the same poll, again, national polling. So you got to be careful about national polling because we elect presidents state by state, not in one big fell swoop.
Right.
But Trump had an edge on the issues, 49-46. And it's a very narrow one. It's really more like a virtual tie, which you kind of expect in these times. But still, I mean, he's at least even with Biden on the issues, if not slightly ahead. He's got a ground organization. Biden doesn't have any at all. I think you have to take all that into consideration when you're looking at these polls and saying it's possible that that's what the status is, but I am not going to be surprised if it turns out to be something very, very different.
Yeah, and that brings up the question. Well, a couple questions come to mind. One, just from your experience, I was an only child growing up. My parents were divorced. And my father died when I was a kid. So it's like I've gone through life as kind of this lone wolf, and it's being in this position and studying the issues we study that I've come to have a great respect for leadership and the importance of leadership. So when you're looking at a campaign, how much of it comes from the top down? Does the candidate, is the lack of a ground game and sort of this low energy, is that simply to be expected, perhaps because of how candidate Biden is seemingly tired and not fully engaged? I would have just expected a race of this importance that, the apparatchiks, the politicals would have come in and just driven it anyway.
All right, so
What do
yeah,
you think is driving this?
couple of points on that. First off, my sister was also an only child growing up, or so she claims. Uh,
Took me a moment to get it.
Thought you'd appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. I
So,
have a brother. I talk to him all the time. You just can't see him. So
yeah, my sister and I are like 13 months apart. So I think both of us wished at various times that we were an only child growing up. But
oh, I believe it.
oh yeah. So how much of it is leadership? I think it's leadership in a couple of different ways. Um, First off, I think Joe Biden is making a very large bet that this election is going to be about nothing but Trump, and policy really doesn't matter. It's the reason why he doesn't want to talk about policies, because policies irritate people, right? They
Absolutely.
demotivate people.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to talk about court packing, either answer he gives runs the risk of losing a big chunk of voters, right? If he
Right.
says I'm all for court packing, then all the moderates are going to run the hell away from him. They may not show up for Trump, but they're not going to vote for him. If he says court packing is a bad idea, which he's said in the past, and he kind of hinted at yesterday,
Right.
then the progressives are going to get annoyed and not show up, or at least not be as enthusiastic.
And that's the base really he needs. He needs that
Right.
base plus the middle. He needs the moderates to go to him. So I mean,
Absolutely. He needs it to.
Trump needs the same thing. So
Well, I mean, you can argue about base turnouts in these things. I think it's a smarter idea to try to appeal to the moderates if you can. But Biden isn't talking about policy. He keeps saying, I've got a plan for this, I've got a plan for that. And then he never talks about what the plan is.
right.
He doesn't really have one. And when he does start talking about plans, he usually gets in trouble because, like for the COVID thing, it's largely what Donald Trump's already done, right? So he's just saying, I've got a plan for this and Donald Trump is awful. That's perfectly fine too. I mean, you can run a campaign based on that. And if you've got a really unpopular incumbent, it might be the smartest way to campaign. But because you're doing that, you don't have to necessarily do a lot of the other blocking and tackling. But more to the point, I think, is that Biden decided that he was going to draw a line here on COVID-19 as a real differentiator and say the president's extraordinarily reckless. He's going out and doing rallies. He's doing the door knocking, and it's putting Americans' lives at risk. And it's, I am going to be the adult in the room, and I'm not going to do any of those things. That's it's a large bet.
So he boxed
might pay off.
in a
He
way
really did.
That.
He did. But the part of this is making a virtue out of a necessity. And this is the reason why. It goes back to Barack Obama. Barack Obama in 2008 built this fabulous voter turnout machine. Started building it in the primaries on his own. But when he won the primaries and he beat Hillary Clinton, he started cannibalizing the DNC's structure and personnel.
Interesting.
And he sucked all that into his presidential campaign. When he won his first term, he converted that into a political action group. This is going back to being the community organizer, which is, again, he wanted to be doing that same type of thing, but in support of policy rather than driving turnout. So
seems like
again, contextualizing the Obamacare, contextualizing Dodd-Frank, and getting voters buy-in on this stuff. Wasn't terribly successful at that. And it left the DNC short of resources in 2010 midterms, and they had a complete disaster. He still had his organization in place in 2012, and he had built all this enormous personal loyalty from people. So they stuck with him. I mean, people have your bumper sticker on their refrigerator,
right,
are not going to vote for Mitt Romney, right? But then after 2012, he did the same thing. He converted it to Organizing for America, OFA. I'm not even sure if that's still a thing, but he never gave the resources back to the DNC. So they lost that midterm cycle too. And then when it came to 2016, Hillary Clinton had built her own organization, but did largely what Mitt Romney did, which was all data analytics, not a lot of ground organization, national messaging. Ends up losing to Donald Trump, who was actually doing some of the same stuff. But Reince Priebus had been doing some of the, had been building this Republican leadership initiative in the meantime. So he'd had a couple of years in, and they had the RNC had some ground game. Trump didn't buy in on that.
It
And that's
doesn't.
important.
Yeah, I remember in the early part of 2016, he seemed to be.
He was,
I mean,
he was,
he was taking
yeah,
advantage of the
we don't
hits,
need that.
and then
We
he
don't need
got
that.
so much
We're getting the
media
earned media.
coverage.
CNN's
Why do you
covering
need
me. I don't need to worry about this stuff. They did later in the campaign. I think even Steve Bannon kind of convinced them that they needed to be doing some of this,
it? Okay.
but they didn't really integrate with the RNC's operation. The RNC built this to be its own operation so that a candidate couldn't just take it and do what Obama did with it, right? So this time around, the RNC and the Trump campaign kind of merged. But the RNC is still in control of what's now called the Trump Victory Leadership Initiative, I think is what they're calling it, the TVLI.
Okay.
And but this time around, Trump, or at least the campaign, is all in on this. So this goes back to the leadership, is that Trump is willing now to talk, to contextualize his message and to do some of that stuff. Now, he himself isn't. He's still doing the national messaging. I'm going to fly in for rallies and stuff like that. But the campaign's doing more of it. And they're working with the RNC on this. And this is, again, another reason why I think when you're looking at polls, you might be looking at people who are a subset rather than a full set. You're looking at people who are, we're not talking about who's been personally contacted by campaigns, because that's a big driver of voter turnout. They're not asking those questions. I don't know that the pollsters are even building models on that basis. And because I think if they did, it might tend to underestimate what Biden support is going to end up being too.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's part of what I'm getting at. Yes, it's the leadership, right? It's the leadership. It comes from a candidate who wants to campaign in a certain style and builds his campaign to do that. This time around, Trump at least is engaged in that process. Whether or not they're actually doing what Obama did in terms of the whole contextualization and emotional connections with really super local units of voters remains to be seen. But Biden isn't doing any of that. I mean,
right.
any of it. Yeah.
I've been fascinated. We're Minnesota. We're now somewhat of a battleground state, and that local contextualization and changes that are afoot. I keep watching the Iron Range, which, viewers who aren't familiar with Minnesota, the northeast corner is the biggest city there is Duluth, and it's right on the shores of Lake Superior, very chilly, cold shores of Lake Superior. It's not like a San Diego beach up there.
It's not Huntington Beach. It ain't Surf City up there, folks. I'm telling you that right now.
No, but you don't need sunscreen, so you're all right.
It's true. It's because you're covered head to toe. You don't need sunscreen if you're covered head to toe.
For those of us joining late, Ed Morrissey is on for our countdown to November, and he and I both are Californians transplanted to Minnesota, and we did it for the weather. It's amazing.
Yep. True story.
But what we're seeing on the ground in the Iron Range, this could be somewhat seismic as far as the changes we're even seeing here in Minnesota. That had long been a confident labor dominated area. And now you're seeing on that local level, as you say, mayors coming out in support endorsing for President Trump and other things along those lines. So do you see, an area like the Iron Range, is that somewhat of a bellwether for the success of President Trump's campaign, or is it just because of the issues? What do you see?
Well, first off, the Iron Range has been slipping Republican for quite some time. Even before Trump, it was slipping Republican. In large part because the Democratic Party has changed directions, right? The Democratic Party, 30, 40 years ago was really working class Catholics, tradesmen, people who saw, meat and potatoes issues and as the province of Democrats, Republicans as the Wall Street, as the party of Wall Street rather than the party of Main Street. I mean, if you want to use slogans, that's
right. The country
simplification, but that's the country club, the rich, that sort of thing. Democrats have become the party of the college campus and of Wall Street. in part Wall Street, right?
Yeah, Silicon Valley. I mean, that's really, you just see.
Silicon Valley, the big techs, the real elitists, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they've really gotten away from the working class roots. Now, Republicans for a long time really didn't take advantage of that until fairly recently. Donald Trump is the one, I wouldn't say he's the first one to push this way, but he's the one who gave it the GOP the hardest shove into back into working class Americans' homes outside of the major urban centers, right?
Right.
Because the urban centers are still Democratic. And Republicans don't play nearly as much as they should there. They just aren't, they're not there. That's part of what I wrote about in the book too. I mean, they don't show up.
No,
you're not going to win if you don't show up.
Yeah, I mean,
huge opportunities.
The situation.
You've got to live there, though.
The situation of crime. That's true, exactly, and
you got to live there.
Problem. So but conservatives need to go in those areas, and arguably, I think that conservative values, if you will, I mean, strong families, hard work ethic, all of these things would greatly benefit a lot of the kids.
Of course it would.
Trapped in an absolutely wretched situation.
But you've got to contextualize it for each community. Mm-hmm. You can't just say free markets, liberty, liberty, liberty.
Couldn't agree with you more.
It doesn't work.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Nobody's
AFP
for capitalism.
No, right, exactly. AFP actually opened offices in these urban centers, not to politics so much, but just to train people so that they would be able to be small businessmen, and or
that was a brilliant move. That actually was a good move.
Absolutely brilliant move, and I didn't even know about this until I was doing the research for the book. I was in I think it was North Carolina. I was in Raleigh when I was talking to some black conservatives out there, and black moderates. Pudgy Miller, who's a great radio guy out in North Carolina, introduced me to him because I met him at an AFP event, and he was the one who told me about this. And I haven't heard about this. And the one thing that he introduced me to some of his friends and family, the one thing they all said to me is, Republicans left, man. Yeah, I don't know where they're at. Where are they? They open an office in July,
right?
And by the second week in November, they're packed up and gone. You know.
Right.
So you got to be there. You got to do that. But getting back to the Iron Range thing, I am skeptical that Trump is going to win Minnesota for a couple of reasons. I always have a couple of reasons. I don't know if you noticed this, Devin, but I always say for a couple of reasons.
We all have our little segue
ticks.
lines and ticks.
It's my tick. Yeah.
I think I've said
first
right
off,
10 times already in this conversation, but I'm enjoying it, and you're right. So
yes, same here. I'm enjoying it. First off, no Republican has won a statewide election in this state since 2006. So color me skeptical until we actually win one of those races.
And even those races, I was on the Plenty campaign for the first round. And you had Plenty, Mo, and Penny. You had a much stronger independent party here in Minnesota that split the vote between, those who are in the center and leaning left. And that enabled Plenty to be able to get into the governorship. But even then, had it not been for that split, I'm not sure how successful he would have been.
Yeah, he won 2002, and then he barely won in 2006. Right. And he was the last Republican to win a statewide election in this state. It was all Democrat except for, that ticket, that 2006 ticket here in the state was all Democrat except for Pawlenty. He was the only Republican who won on that ticket. And I like Pawlenty. He was really a good fit for Minnesota, which is the reason why he carried the election that time around. But we haven't won one since. And so I'm kind of waiting to see us win a constitutional office before I start making predictions of a presidential victory in a state that hasn't gone red since 72.
Right.
We came close in 2016, but people forget that the reason why we came close is that Hillary Clinton got 180,000 fewer votes than Barack Obama had gotten 4 years earlier. Donald Trump really didn't in Minnesota.
I didn't realize that.
It was a turnout issue. Again, this is because they didn't have a turnout machine out here.
Right?
There wasn't any excitement
on the ground. Amazing.
No boots on the ground. Well, they did have boots on the ground. I don't want to overstate the error for Hillary Clinton. They had boots on the ground. They had a kind of semi-traditional get out the vote thing. They just didn't put a lot of emphasis on it because they were doing all the data analytics and national messaging. They thought that was enough. I'm going to be the first woman president. Everybody wants the first woman president. That's enough. It's kind of like Biden saying nobody wants Donald Trump to be president. I don't really need to do anything. I just need to not be Donald Trump.
There's a
Maybe.
bit of arrogance to it.
Yes.
This discussion reminds me a lot. Did you ever read Plunkett of Tammany Hall?
No.
Way back, the Tammany Hall machine, and it's very interesting. It talks about there's good graft and there's bad graft. If you know that the city government's going to buy this land, well, good graft is you go buy it first and sell it for more money. It's kind of a funny thing, but there's a story in there to get to how particular things are in local on the ground, where a prominent Irishman in one of the Irish neighborhoods passed away. And the Tammany Hall, Plunkett, went and rented every single funeral carriage in the cities. And so all of a sudden, this poor Irishman's family is, oh my gosh, we don't have any funeral carriages. We are embarrassed. What are we going to do? And lo and behold, here comes, Plunkett, who says, I've got one for you. I can make it work. And lo and behold, it's amazing how politics actually works. And I guess that brings me to one of the things I've noticed is there are a lot of eyes on Minnesota, especially given what we unleashed due to George Floyd, the weakness of Mayor Fry of Minneapolis, the weakness particularly of Tim Walz when it comes to the National Guard, and of course the whole defund the police really arguably started here, and we've seen disastrous consequences. How do you see it impacting Minnesota? Are we willing as a state to change gears and say, you know what, this is a disaster and the current leadership has failed miserably in this? Or are we going to do the Scandinavian thing where we just internalize it and keep going as if nothing's wrong?
Well, you and I are California Irishmen, so I mean, we don't do this. We don't do the Scandinavian thing very well here. I think I've kind of picked it up by osmosis, though. I think if this was a midterm where the state offices were up for election, Democrats would be in a deep, deep trouble here, and they still might be 2 years from now. Here's where I think that they're going to have a worry. I think that people in the cities are simply not going to be enthusiastic about voting, not for Biden, and not for not for the Democratic establishment that really let them down. I think that they're going to look at that as, Democrat DFL failures that allowed the city to burn, that allowed the businesses to get burned out, that are with crime exploding. I mean, Minneapolis is the city, and I don't need to tell alphanewsmn.com anything about this. They've had, reporters attacked out there. But I'll say it anyway. Minneapolis.
To know how insane it has. I mean, it went from this idealistic, everybody's safe, and then the Scandinavian pride of we're better than everybody else, even though we're not. The Minnesota nice.
I know exactly what you mean.
That's fascinating, but it's been a disaster here.
It's a disaster, And so,
what's going on?
The city of Minneapolis sent out a memo or sent out a statement or a letter to its residents, basically saying, if you are the victim of crime, lie back and think of England. I mean,
just give them your purse, give them your wallet,
give them everything they ask for.
Really said, do whatever they say. I mean,
which is not bad advice, but I mean. But the basic function of government, the basic function of government, the reason why you have government is to protect the citizens of a community so that they can go about their business in peace. Right. It's the reason why you have it disturbing the peace.
Yeah.
The common good and maintaining the peace. That's the basic form of government. If government is telling you, if they're sending signals that they can't meet that, or more to the point, aren't willing to do what it takes to meet that. Yes. it's a demotivating thing. And here's where I think Republicans might have a chance in Minnesota. You're talking about enthusiasm in the Iron Range. You can talk about enthusiasm in Minnesota 7, right? The whole western side of the state. You can talk about Minnesota 1, where it's narrow, but Republicans have gotten an edge in Minnesota 1. Minnesota 2 apparently isn't even going to be deciding who their congressman is until February now, but that's okay.
I saw that.
It's my district. It's fine, whatever. But they're going to be voting in the presidential election. I mean, that's not going to keep people in 2 from turning out. But I think the suburbs are going to take a really hard look at what happened in Minneapolis and to a lesser extent St. Paul and say, we need to have a renewed emphasis on law and order. And I think the people in 4 and 5, this is your core urban congressional districts, are simply not going to be enthusiastic about turning out for this. They're not going to turn into Republicans. I mean, Minnesota 5 is, nuts.
Yeah,
Minnesota 4 is only slightly less so. But I would be surprised if it doesn't fall off as much as maybe 15-20%.
That much? Really?
Who wants to stand in line for the polls?
Well, not when you've got
in Minneapolis
carjackings and
do
you
at
the end of the line, you're a target. Yeah, goodness.
Would you like to be on the sidewalk in Minneapolis voting for in these neighborhoods?
No. I just on my Twitter feed, I follow some of the the Crime Watch Twitter feeds, and they're of course listening to the scanners and then putting stuff out. And a resident of Minneapolis had posted, and basically, it was a video from their Ring door, the doorbell camera at the front, and the person writes, "I am enraged. This city is falling into chaos. Just last night, I'm treated to a running gun battle in my neighborhood, and bullets hit my cars, bullets hit my house." And so I watched the Ring video, and they're not kidding. There must have been 30 shots at least. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, a couple shots, that's a gun. No, this was truly a gun battle in a residential neighborhood. And you're seeing it over and almost every night. There's stories like these coming out. And even in the day, you're getting people, the whole carjacking thing. I mean, that seems to be now a popular thing to do. Carjack somebody and drive around the car all day committing crimes.
Because the city has sent a message of impunity. The state isn't stepping in to counteract it. And so criminals have picked up on this and are acting with impunity. And let me tell you, I'm not criticizing the people in those neighborhoods who are going to be leery about going out and voting, because I think that's really understandable. Those people, by the way, are the ones who have been telling the city council, you're out of your mind abolishing the police department. We don't need less police. We need more and better policing. That's what we actually need. And it's these, out of touch extremist progressives who live in the fancy neighborhoods, who pay for their own security, who go on television, national television, and I'm not going to name names, Lisa Bender, excuse me, and go on about how calling the police for an intrusion on your property is privilege speaking. I mean, it's insane.
Oh, it's absolutely insane.
It's crazy. So the people who are living in these areas are not going to be enthusiastic about turning out to support the people who are supporting, Joe Biden. Now, I don't think they're going to love Donald Trump either. I just don't think they're going to turn out. And if they don't, that's a huge blow, because half of the vote in Minnesota comes from the Twin Cities and the Ring suburbs in there. And if that vote doesn't turn out for the DFL, I mean, it's not going to impact state races. It's not going to impact statewide races other than the presidency, because we don't. Well, I take that back. We've got Tina Smith's seat. Yeah. We got the Tina Smith seat. Jason Lewis here, I think, has an opportunity with this. So, I completely forgot about Jason being on the ticket. I mean, Jason's got a chance under those circumstances. All the TV ads in the world for Tina Smith talking about how she likes to work across the aisle is not going to turn out votes in those neighborhoods when the DFL's leadership in Minneapolis and to a lesser extent St. Paul are talking about abolishing the police and sending in psychiatrists rather than armed police officers for, domestic disturbance calls,
It's a
and
great idea.
just craziness, absolute insanity.
Well, and
Yeah,
now, when you're looking, as you had mentioned earlier, the the suburbs, but particularly
yeah.
suburban moms and women, I've been very curious to see the results of this election when it comes to that demographic group. I mean,
Yeah,
on one
me
hand,
too.
on one hand, you've got, well, I want to be safe. I don't want my kids being worried. I don't want to get carjacked, all of this. But then you have the virtue signaling and sort of the culture of suburban moms and women in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities. It's
I, I
definitely
think
left
it's
leaning.
I think it's more than virtue signaling, though. And here's where I think Donald Trump steps on his own message to the
Okay.
detriment of Republicans down the ticket, which is that the reality is that Donald Trump is a outer borough New York guy who just likes to let it rip, and he doesn't really give a damn what people think about him, and he says crass things. And I think that when you're talking about suburban moms, I think they value a certain level of what's a good word for this? A certain level of civility, I
Yeah,
guess,
decorum, I guess. Yes.
decorum, and I don't think they like the chaos agent approach to things, because they are. I mean, they are security minded, right? So under
Mhm.
these circumstances, with the chaos that's going on in the streets in Minneapolis and St. Paul to a lesser extent, you'd expect them to say, okay, well, let's go ahead and go with the law and order vote. Let's go with the law and order candidate. But Donald Trump, being a chaos agent himself, it may not, you may not get that swing. But what you might get is those suburban moms might just say,
Yeah, I don't
I
care
pox
for
on both houses.
exactly. No,
Yeah.
no, that's yeah, very interesting. I am very curious to see how this all plays out with it. On the, we've only got a few minutes left, but on the bigger picture, I mean, what do you take for the state of our culture and the future of the country when we're looking at not just the unrest and violence here in Minneapolis, but I mean, Portland, I think day
Yeah.
130 or 40, and you have open violence on the street. And then over the weekend, you have a Trump supporter, a Patriot Prayer guy, shot and killed at a rally.
Yep.
Uh, this is becoming a very disturbing trend. And even
Yep.
polling is showing that more and more folks on the left and on the right believe that violence is sometimes okay to achieve your political ends. How do we pull out of this mess, or does it just keep getting worse?
Well, until you start imposing order, it's going to keep getting worse. And the reason why you're seeing more people gravitate towards violence is because it's incentivized. I
Mm,
mean, the police are in retreat, so they're not enforcing. They're not. I don't want to say they're not enforcing the law. They're trying to do what they can do, but they're being increasingly hemmed in from being able to do the types of policing that keep things from getting out of control, right?
yes.
And so now the only time that people see the police is when there's blood in the street, right? And when the police really absolutely have to be out there.
Yeah,
So that's no way to do policing. It's the worst way to do policing. The best way to do policing is to have enough officers on the street to where they get to know the people that are in those neighborhoods, and those people get to know them, and you build a rapport. Um, you have to have more officers. You have to have them better trained. You have to have them more accountable in order to make that work. So there's things that we can do to fix that problem. But what we're doing is the worst of all worlds. We have fewer police resources on the street, and we're not allowing them to do the job that they could be doing, even with the fewer resources. And so what that says is, when you see people rioting and burning for 130 days in Portland without any consequences whatsoever, I mean, the Portland prosecutors are refusing to prosecute these cases.
thank you. It's amazing.
It's
You follow
it's
Andy.
astounding.
Andy knows his Twitter feed, and
Yeah,
after every night of rioting, he puts up the pictures and notes, here's this person, so and so, 28, released, no bail. And every single one of them. I have yet to
yeah.
think I've seen
They
just
won't prosecute.
no, no, and
They
same
won't
thing
prosecute.
in Chicago. Unbelievable.
Yeah, just to stay on Portland for a bit, because Chicago's a little bit more complicated. There's other things going on in Chicago too, but in Portland, you've got total impunity. The city won't impose order. The state won't impose order. They are resisting the efforts by the Department of Justice to deputize police officers so that they can refer these cases for federal prosecution. And so the message is that the state is endorsing violence. And if that's the case, more people are, that's an incentive. More people are going to commit violence as a result.
Well, the mayor situation, there's a mayor race going on, and I believe it's Mayor Ted Wheeler.
Yes.
Looks like he quite possibly could be knocked out of the spot and replaced by a woman, wearing a dress that has pictures of Mao and Lenin on it and is, I guess, openly sympathetic to Antifa. Some might go even further, but we'll just leave it at that. I mean, what in the world does that look like for the city and for America to have one of our major cities in such disastrous of a position without law and order? I mean, just violence on the street and not a single person in government willing to actually do their job. That's a troubling place for us as a country. And
it's a very troubling place. It's a really, and here's the thing too. I mean, let's not lose sight of the personal human cost of that. There are a number of really, I mean, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of really great people in and around Portland, regardless of whether we agree on politics or not. All they want to do is live their lives, express their views, and take care of their families, right? Those people are being terrorized on a nightly basis. And the government that they have put in power is refusing to do anything about it. Again, basic duty of government is to keep order, keep the peace, and protect people in their daily lives as much as you possibly can. You can't guarantee that there'll never be no crime, but you have to make an effort, and they're not even making an effort. And at a certain point, people are going to come to the conclusion that that form of government is useless. And this is the risk. If we are not going to live by the rule of law, if we are not going to keep order by using the rule of law, by using the rules of self-governance to keep order on the streets, you're eventually going to have some sort of cataclysmic reaction to this, which is exactly what these anarchists want.
Well, and that gets to, that's a point that I make as well. We're a self-governing nation, but self-governing the nation starts with self-governing the self. And if it does, if people are becoming unable to govern the self and rein in their vices, I mean, we don't even believe in vices anymore. And so you get into a spot where people want order. They want things taken care of. So do you see that as a legitimate concern moving forward?
Oh, sure. It's a legitimate concern. We don't teach the virtues anymore. There's the classical education's gone. We're not learning from our elders anymore. We're just assuming that the world was created 5 minutes before we were born. I mean, that's part of the issue here. With that said, I think if you look at Portland, the vast, overwhelming majority of people there just really want to be able to go to work, earn a living, take care of their families, be able to express their political views, whatever they happen to be, in peace, and I think that that's our expectation. The problem is you've got a few extremists that are generating all of this, and the people who live in those communities treated elections unseriously for so many years that they've got morons, very extremely unserious people in positions of authority.
And ideologically driven too, quite often.
Well, ideologically driven, but also they're just cowards. They're cowards. We see this here. The city council has the police department answers to the city council.
Right.
There's no consent decree, by the way, here in Minnesota. So it's not like the Minneapolis Police Department is answering to the Department of Justice. The Minneapolis Police Department answers to the city council. The city council has the authority to negotiate contracts with the police union, and because they're complaining about the police union. The problem is that the people on the Minneapolis City Council have for decades gotten those positions because of union support from public employee unions. Not necessarily the police department, but PEUs. And how did they get that support? By basically pledging to give them whatever they want when they're on the other side of the bargaining table with these unions.
Utterly corrupt.
It's
a corruption
it's a corruption of the system. I wouldn't say that there's specific individual corruption. But it's corrupted the process.
I should take that back. I don't mean legal corruption, but that
morally corrupt, ethically corrupt.
Corruption of the intention of how we have our system set up, if you will.
This is a good reason why I would argue that unions are probably necessary for police and fire, just because of the danger of the job. But otherwise, public employee unions shouldn't exist. They work for the city, they work for the state, they work for the people. And the city council should have control over policies and that sort of thing. Anyway, they have that authority. Rather than exercise that authority, rather than impose the reforms that they want, pass the rules, pass the laws, pass the regulations, or kick it up to the state for the state to do something about this, they've just simply abdicated all responsibility, and now they just don't want a police department at all. It's just too hard. It's too hard for us to do this. Let's just not have a police department at all, and it'll all be utopia. It's nonsense. These people are idiots. They're unserious people, and they're there because the people of Minneapolis, it gets back to the people. The people of Minneapolis don't take that stuff seriously. So they elect a bunch of morons who don't really want to do anything with this job except pose. And
I think that's a problem across the country. I mean,
absolutely it is
here, but I mean, if you were to ask most people, what's the name of the mayor of your town, let alone city council members and things of that nature, most people won't even have a clue.
Yeah, is your city incorporated or is it unincorporated? Is it a charter city? Is it a non-charter city?
What are you? Yes, exactly. Right. Exactly.
I mean,
that's just right over.
It was no better in California when I left, by the way.
Oh.
This is not a knock on Minnesota specifically, but the problem is that people take the presidential election a little too seriously. People don't take local elections anywhere near serious enough. Right. And what you're seeing this summer is what you get for a result. You get Portland, you get Minneapolis, you get Chicago, you get Chicago's mayor dressing up like Corona Destroyer.
I saw
a press conference.
Well,
our city's burning.
I was embarrassed for the city just seeing that. It does not go with the office that she holds. In that childish and joking manner. Especially in a time of crisis, and especially when you're
right. I was going to say,
if it's getting burned and looted to the ground, and crime is going.
Yeah, if everything was fine. I'm all for a sense of humor and a light touch and a little bit of self-effacing humor. Sure, everything is not fun in Chicago. No. It hasn't been for a long time.
Oh, it's a dumpster fire, man.
Yeah, and everything's not fine in Portland.
It's a disaster there, and the debt and everything else.
Yeah. So the bottom line here is that you're getting at every level. We're getting the government we deserve. I think it was H.L. Mencken is. He said something, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, so I'm going to paraphrase it, is that democracy is people getting what they want and getting it good and hard.
Yes, exactly. Yep. It's true.
That's what we got, because people don't take it seriously.
Yeah. The government that we have is, for better or worse, a reflection of who we are as a people. So it seems we've got a lot of work to do. And I noticed coming up on the bottom of the hour, and you have been most generous with your time, Ed, and thank you for that. Any, last points to leave our viewers with? Sure,
because I want to say this, as a Christian, there's always hope. And if you don't think of people as people, if you just think of as opponents or whatever, you can feel very despairing about what's going on. But there's a lot of good people on both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of good people on both sides of Minneapolis, for that matter. There's a lot of good people who are being victimized. So we can sit here and say, well, they got the government they deserve, and that's true. It's very true. But we can also pray for them and hopefully, push people to put in better policies and to help those people not be living in a free fire zone by putting pressure, public pressure on the cities and the counties and on the state to do something about this. Really, it's not too much of a reach to say that really this is a life and death issue in the local areas. And we should all be very concerned about that. But we should also remember that we're Americans, we're Christians. As Christians, we know the battle's already won. We're Americans. We know we can do pretty much anything that we set our minds to do. We've gone through tough times, and we'll get through these as well.
That's beautiful, Ed. Makes me want to start another hour session with you. So,
well, you know what? I'm happy to do this anytime. So you guys just let me know. It's always a fun group to come talk to.
oh, that's fantastic, Ed. Thank you so much. And truer words couldn't be spoken. I mean, look at your neighbor and ask yourself, how much do you really hate your neighbor, up and down? Why do we have this animosity towards each other? And as Ed said, each of us has dignity in the image of God. I think that's something very important to keep in mind, especially as people are, at each other's throats almost, sometimes even literally these days. So thank you, Ed. I think that was a very good end stone to our bookend for this discussion. Today, we've just had our First Tuesdays conservatives lead up to the election. Tomorrow we'll have another one at 11 a.m. October 14. That'll be with Katie Hopkins. And then at 6:30 we're going to have a local commentator and another Irishman, John Gilmore, with us. So tune in for all of those. And again, thank you. This is provided by the First Tuesday Conservatives and co-hosted by Alpha News and Charlemagne Institute. Check out both of them as well. And I am Devin Foley, CEO of the Charlemagne Institute. Thank you so much for joining us.